Another thing we're watching right now in the multifamily market, you guys, is the overbuild that took place. So, multifamily units that are under construction, they dropped by over 30% from their late 2023 peak, and the pipeline is still shrinking. I know that might sound bad, but it's actually the correction the market's needing, and it's going to eventually put pressure on rents because when supply drops off and there's not as many places to choose from for rent, now rents go back up. So, hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Keeping It Real Estate. I'm your host, Dan Brisse. You guys, the one big beautiful bill, right? This act, it was signed July 4th, 2025. And most people think, it's just politics, but buried inside are some of the biggest tax changes that the real estate investors have seen in decades. And so this isn't theory. The changes, they directly affect how we buy and hold and profit from apartments at Granite Towers. And most investors have no idea. So we own 430 million of assets under management in the apartment world. If you don't know me, I'm a two-time X Games gold medalist, two-time X Games silver medalist. I went from paying 40% in taxes as a professional snowboarder to legally sheltering my income through real estate. And that was from my CPA giving me great advice. And anyway, this bill, it just made that strategy even more powerful. So you got 100% bonus depreciation and it's back. Bonus depreciation, it was sunsetting for those of you that don't know. It was down to 40% in 2025, headed to 20% in 2026, and then 0% in 2027. And the government just reversed all of that. So 100% bonus depreciation, it's now permanent. And what this means in plain English is when we buy an apartment building, we do this thing called a cost segregation study. And what that study does is it classifies parts of the building, like things like flooring and cabinetry, landscaping, parking lots. And it turns it from a 27 and a half year depreciation schedule to a 5, 7, or 15-year category. Then we write off 100% of those components in year one. So the real math, let's just take on a $500,000 property. A cost seg study might identify maybe 125,000 in short life assets. And at a 37% tax bracket, that's nearly 46 grand in tax savings in year one alone. You multiply that across our portfolio, and that's how Granite Towers investors shelter income legally. And you guys can be a part of that. There's a part in the tax code called Section 179, and it matters because for value add operators like us, when we renovate a building, new appliances, HVAC systems, fixtures, all of that can be expensed immediately under 179 instead of depreciating it over decades. So between bonus depreciation and Section 179, the tax code is essentially, paying you to improve real estate, and the government wants capital flowing into housing. They're incentivizing it aggressively by creating this tax law. The other piece is the estate tax exemption just jumped to 15 million per person or $30 million per couple. And that's permanently. And that's indexed for inflation. So before this bill, it was scheduled to drop back to roughly 7 million in 2026. And the reason this matters for real estate investors is if you're building a portfolio of apartment buildings, you can now pass 30 million to your heirs without a single dollar in tax estate. You combine that with depreciation, cost segregation, 1031 exchanges, and you're building generational wealth that the government essentially cannot touch. So this is a game that wealthy families have played for decades. And the difference now is the rules just got significantly more favorable. Another thing we're watching right now in the multifamily market, you guys, is the overbuild that took place. So multifamily units that are under construction, they dropped by over 30% from their late 2023 peak, and the pipeline is still shrinking. I know that might sound bad, but it's actually the correction the market's needing, and it's going to eventually put pressure on rents because when supply drops off and there's not as many places to choose from for rent, now rents go back up. So in markets that overbuilt during the pandemic boom, rents are deflating. They're going down. When rents go down, investors get squeezed, buyer demand drops, and sellers get forced to the table. And that's what's happening right now in parts of Florida and in Texas. But in markets with constrained supply, even modest demand keeps inventory tight and prices resilient. So this is why we're not chasing these hot markets, right? We're buying in markets where supply is limited and demand is durable. That's the focus for us. We're looking for locations that have actual pent up demand right now. If we can find occupancy where all of the comps are 95, 96% occupied, and we got supply falling off a cliff, what that does is it almost guarantees, and nothing's guaranteed in investing, but it puts a lot of pressure or the likelihood of a lot of pressure on rents in the near future because supply controls demand.